A fellow TREC-approved instructor asked me to discuss an issue he has had to address in some of his classes, and for which he has received differing opinions from attorneys. First, I want to remind everyone, attorneys argue for a living. Now, having said that, here is the question. When an amendment is delivered along with a notice of termination of contract, what is the impact? Does the notice of termination terminate the contract? And if the contract is terminated, is the amendment viable? I have always cautioned agents not to send a notice of termination along with an amendment if the intent is to get the amendment signed, and if the amendment is not signed, then terminate the contract. My reasoning was to avoid terminating the contract before the parties were ready to. In my opinion, the second the seller decides not to sign the amendment as is, the termination would be effective. This leaves no opportunity for the seller to counter the amendment. By not signing the amendment as is, the notice of termination is effective. This explanation, though, still leaves unanswered whether by sending a notice of termination along with an amendment without any further explanation effectively terminates the contract and thus makes the amendment ineffective. In my opinion, I believe the argument could be made without any more evidence to the contrary that when an amendment is sent along with a notice of termination, it is clear that the intent is, if the amendment is not agreed to, then the contract terminates. Any other interpretation would not make sense. Most of the time, though, an email or a conversation between agents occurs expressly stating that the amendment comes first. In that case, then no, sending the notice of termination does not terminate the contract until the amendment is not signed. Once the amendment is signed, it is effective. Irrespective of the argument of intent, in my opinion, it is not best practice to send a notice of termination at the same time an amendment is sent for all the reasons discussed. There is one other point to consider that is critical. Amendments should never be sent directly to the seller or buyer by the agent of the other party. All contacts for negotiation need to go through the agent representing the party. On the other hand, any notice required under the contract must be sent as set out in paragraph 22 of the contract in order to be effective. A notice sent only to an agent for the receiving party may not be effective unless that is the only address in paragraph 22 for the notices. Paragraph 22 of the contract states that notices under the contract are effective when sent in writing and as required in that paragraph. Please be mindful, an amendment and notice may not need and maybe should not go to the same place. I hope this podcast is of interest to you and you find value in them. If so, please let us do business with you. I would love to see you at the closing table. Thank you.